My sister demands I slave away for her. I had my milestone birthday celebration just a couple of weeks ago. My parents and a massive group of our relatives gathered at a beautiful downtown bistro that my folks had reserved for the night. After we finished our main courses and the waitstaff brought out my dessert, my mother insisted I start unwrapping my boxes right there at the table so we wouldn't have to lug them all back to the car. I made my way through the usual cards and clothes, thanking everyone politely. Then my older sister and her husband slid a heavy box across the tablecloth. I ripped off the wrapping paper and popped the lid. Inside, resting on top of cheap hardware store tools, was a custom printed clipboard with my name and the title Head Property Manager etched into the wood. I stared at it, completely bewildered, trying to process what kind of joke this was. The bistro was loud, smelling heavily of roasted garlic and expensive red wine, but our long table went dead quiet. I looked up from the clipboard. My sister Clara was practically vibrating in her seat. Her husband Mark had this smug, tight-lipped smile on his face like they had just cured a disease. My mother leaned over my shoulder to peer into the box. She suddenly gasped, clapping her hands together, the sound sharp like a gunshot over the quiet jazz playing in the background. "Oh my God," my mother shouted to the room. "Clara bought a building." Clara instantly knew. She jumped up from her chair, nearly knocking over her half-empty water glass. She didn't look at me. She looked at our cousins, our aunts, our uncles. She announced to the entire restaurant that she and her husband just closed on a severely rundown 20-unit apartment complex on the east side of town. She began monologuing. She paced the length of the table, talking about profit margins, gentrification, and her new real estate empire. She boasted that this family gathering, my 18th birthday dinner, was the perfect audience to launch her new venture. People stared. Some offered polite, confused applause. Finally, Clara circled back to my chair. She beamed down at me. She told me that her generous gift to me was the opportunity to manage the renovations. I would be handling contractor schedules, picking up materials, and dealing with tenant complaints. For free, of course, to build my resume. "Are you excited to start swinging a hammer?" she asked, her voice pitched high and demanding. I looked down at the cheap plastic handle of a hammer resting in the box. The metal was already tarnished. I just nodded. I stood up, pushing my chair back so hard it scraped against the hardwood floor. "I need some air," I muttered. I didn't just step outside. The November air hit my face, sharp and freezing, but I didn't stop at the awning. I walked 3 blocks away, putting the glowing neon sign of the bistro far behind me. I found a quiet bus stop with a cracked plastic bench and sat in the dark. Cars drove by, the streetlights flickered. I sat there shivering in my nice button-down shirt for a couple of hours, just staring at the pavement, waiting for the anger to turn into something tangible. It never did. A familiar car rolled up to the curb. The headlights washed over my sneakers. The passenger window rolled down. My dad leaned over from the driver's seat. "Get in," he said. His voice was heavy. I opened the door and dropped into the heated leather seat. I braced myself. I waited for the massive lecture about embarrassing the family, about walking out on my own party, about leaving the bill. He didn't say a word. He put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. We drove past the bistro, past the highway on-ramp, and pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. We went inside. The place smelled like old grease and industrial floor cleaner. We slid into a vinyl booth in the back. My dad ordered us a basket of fries and 2 black coffees. When the waitress walked away, he folded his hands on the laminate table. "I'm sorry," he said. That was it. We just quietly talked about the whole mess. He told me he had no idea what Clara and my mother had planned. He thought the heavy box held a laptop for college. He watched the whole thing unfold at the table and felt sick to his stomach. We sat there eating cold fries, dissecting the absolute delusion of my sister, thinking an 18-year-old was going to act as an unpaid general contractor for a collapsing building. By the time we returned home, it was past midnight. The house was blazing with lights. I walked through the front door and saw my untouched birthday cake sitting on the kitchen island. The icing was streaked with sweat under the tinted lights. Footsteps pounded down the stairs. My mother marched into the hallway. Her face was flushed, her jaw tight. She started screaming before her feet even hit the bottom of the steps. She called me ungrateful. She yelled about wasted reservations, the expensive food I didn't eat, how I had humiliated the family. Clara and Mark emerged from the living room. They looked furious. Clara had her arms crossed, whining about how cruel I was to abandon them during their big professional debut. "It was my birthday," I said, my voice shaking a little but staying steady. "Oh, grow up," Clara snapped. "Your coming-of-age milestone is childish compared to our corporate milestones. We are building generational wealth. You threw a tantrum over a party." My mother vigorously nodded, stepping closer to me. "You owe your sister an apology." At that point, my dad snapped. He didn't yell, which made it worse. He took a step forward, towering over my mother, his voice dropping into a low, terrifying register. "Get out," he said, pointing a finger directly at Mark and Clara. Clara blinked, stunned. "Dad, we're just—" I said, "Get out of my house." He didn't blink. He watched them scramble to grab their coats from the rack. The front door slammed behind them. Then, my dad turned his anger on my mother. He demanded to know why they didn't have the decency to run this ridiculous unpaid labor scheme by me privately. He asked her what kind of mother hijacks her own child's birthday dinner to pitch a free labor scam. My mother tried to argue back, but she had nothing. She just sputtered about family loyalty. I walked past them, went into my room, and locked the door. By the next morning, the silence in the house was suffocating. I woke up to my phone vibrating off the nightstand. Clara was dealing with a barrage of text messages from our cousins and uncles, and she was screenshotting them and sending them to me in a blind rage. They told her it was remarkably tasteless. I read a text from my Uncle David telling her that stealing the spotlight on my night was a desperate, pathetic move. They wished her well with her investments, but they made it clear that hijacking an 18-year-old's party to demand free labor was totally out of line. Clara blamed me. She texted me, "Look what you did. You turned the family against us because you couldn't just say thank you." I didn't reply. Yesterday afternoon, the tension finally boiled over. My dad insisted we have a final conversation to put an end to it. He told my mother to invite Clara and Mark over. We sat in the living room. The TV was off. The only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I didn't wait for Clara to start her pitch again. I looked her dead in the eye and calmly explained my position. "I absolutely will not manage your construction site," I said. "I will not deal with your tenants. I am a student, not a contractor. A collapsing building is a legal nightmare that belongs in the hands of seasoned professionals, not a teenager. I'm not doing it." Clara's face tightened. tightened. She tried to guilt trip me. She talked about how much she had sacrificed for me growing up, driving me to soccer practice, helping me with homework. She said family helps family build their dreams. I held my ground. Hire a property manager, Clara. That is when she completely lost her mind. She stood up, kicking the coffee table. She screamed that I was destroying her financial future. She yelled that she had factored my free labor into their loan application, that they couldn't afford a real manager, and that she had gone out of her way to buy me that stupid clipboard. Both she and my mother began tearing into me. My mother stood up, pointing a trembling finger at my face. She insisted that real estate is a brutal business, and I was being a selfish brat for not supporting the family enterprise. You live under our roof, my mother yelled. You contribute. My dad stepped between us. He aggressively defended me, his voice booming through the living room. He argued no teenager should sacrifice their youth to rescue a poorly planned investment property. He told my mother that treating me like unpaid staff was abusive and insane. My mother fired back, her face red with fury, that my party was already over anyway. She said I needed to fall in line to protect my sister's credit score. Her credit score is not his responsibility. My dad roared. He pointed at Clara. You intentionally ruined his birthday to feed your own ego. Clara's face crumpled. She burst into fake, loud tears, burying her face in Mark's shoulder, wailing about how nobody supported her. I didn't stay to watch the performance. I walked upstairs. I packed my bags that same night. I threw a week's worth of clothes, my laptop, and my school books into a duffel bag. I am currently crashing in my aunt's guest room. The house smells like lavender and old paperbacks. It's quiet here, but my phone won't stop buzzing. I am dodging relentless texts from my mother calling me a disgrace, telling me I need to come home and apologize to my sister. I have blocked Firely. Mark 2. Now my dad is having serious conversations with my aunt in the kitchen. I hear them talking in low voices over coffee. He is talking about filing for legal separation with my mother. He told my aunt he realizes he can no longer tolerate a marriage built on such a toxic, delusional foundation. He can't look at my mother the same way after seeing how willing she was to sacrifice my future for Clara's ego. I thought being at my aunt's house would give me space to breathe, but yesterday, the reality of Clara's delusion caught up with me in a way I didn't see coming. I was sitting at the kitchen table, working on a history essay, when the doorbell rang. My aunt was out at the grocery store, so I answered it. A guy in a faded neon yellow safety vest was standing on the porch holding a thick manila folder. Delivery for the property manager, he said, looking down at his own clipboard. To check the name, he read my name out loud. My stomach dropped. I'm not the property manager. Look, kid, I just delivered the paperwork. Are you? He read my name again. Yes, but I doubt. Great. I just need a signature confirming receipt. He shoved an electronic pad at me. I refused to touch it. I'm not signing anything. What is this? I asked, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. He sighed, pulled a piece of paper from the folder, and handed it to me. It was a copy of a municipal work permit for structural demolition. Listed at the very top under primary on-site contractor was my full legal name, my cell phone number, and my parents' home address. At the bottom was a signature that vaguely looked like mine, but the loops were all wrong. It was Clara's handwriting. She had forged my signature on city documents to save money on registering a licensed professional. I stared at the paper. The letters swam in front of my eyes. A collapsing building wasn't just a metaphor anymore. It was a legally binding trap, and Clara had shoved me into it before she even handed me that wooden clipboard at dinner. I closed the door on the delivery guy and locked it. I stood in the hallway, the paper trembling in my hands. I didn't wait. I called my dad. He picked up on the second ring. His voice sounded exhausted, scraped raw from days of arguing. Dad, I said, staring at the forged signature. Clara put my name on city permits. She forged my signature as the primary on-site manager. Silence on the line. Then a sharp, heavy exhale. I'm coming over. Don't sign anything else. Don't reply to anyone. 20 minutes later, his tires crunched into the gravel driveway. He walked into my aunt's kitchen looking 10 years older than he had at the restaurant. I slid the copy document across the island. He put on his reading glasses. I watched his eyes track across the page, his jaw tightening until the muscle ticked near his ear. She didn't just forge your name, he said quietly, his voice dangerously level. She used your social security number. My stomach hit the floor. How would she get my social? My dad took his glasses off and rubbed his face. Your mother. She keeps all your documents in the safe upstairs. I noticed the lockbox was sitting out on the desk yesterday, but I didn't want it. He trailed off, staring blankly at the wall. The betrayal in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. My mother hadn't just enabled my sister's ego. She had actively participated in committing fraud against her own son to save her daughter $50,000 in contractor licensing fees. It gets worse, my dad muttered, dropping the paper onto the counter. I went to the bank this morning to open a separate checking account. I pulled the statements for our joint savings. The college fund is fine, it's in a trust. But our emergency savings, $30,000 is gone. I stared at him. Gone? Transferred out 3 days before your birthday dinner. To a limited liability company. Clara's receipt. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. Your mother gave her our safety net to close on that rotting building. And now they are trying to use you as the legal shield when the city starts handing out code violations. The kitchen felt completely disconnected from reality. Outside, a neighbor was mowing their lawn. The smell of cut grass drifted through the open window. It was such an aggressively normal Tuesday afternoon. But inside this house, everything I knew about my family was actively disintegrating. My dad stood up. He walked over to the stage and leaned heavily against the counter, looking out into the backyard. What do we do? I asked. I have a meeting with a lawyer tomorrow morning, he said without turning around, for the separation. But now, I have to ask him about fraud against my own wife and daughter. He turned his head to look at me, and for the first time in my life, my dad looked genuinely afraid. They're going to lose everything, kid, he said, and they're trying to drag us down with them. My phone buzzed on the counter. Another unknown number. I didn't touch it. The screen lit up the dark granite, flashing a preview of the message. It's Mom. Your father locked me out of the bank account. Tell him to stop this right now before you ruin Clara's life. I watched the screen go dark. I didn't move. Dad, I said. My voice sounded thin in the quiet kitchen. He turned around. I tapped the black screen of my phone, waking it up and slid it across the granite island toward him. He didn't pick it up. He just leaned over, resting his hands flat on the counter and read the notification. I watched the muscles in his jaw bunch up again. He didn't yell. He didn't curse. He just picked up my phone, unlocked it with the passcode he knew, and went into the settings. He blocked my mother's number. Don't talk to her, he said, setting the phone face down. Don't talk to Clara. Don't talk to Mark. If anyone else in the family reaches out acting as a flying monkey for your mother, block them too. We are dealing with facts now, not feelings. And the fact is, they stole from us, and they forged your signature on a government document. He pushed himself off the counter and grabbed his car keys from the bowl by the door. He told me he was going to see if his lawyer friend Tom could squeeze him in for an emergency consultation this afternoon instead of tomorrow morning. He told me to lock the door behind him and to absolutely not answer it if my mother showed up. When the front door clicked shut, the house went dead silent again. My aunt's grandfather clock ticked in the hallway. I sat back down at the kitchen table and pulled my history essay toward me, but the words were just black squiggles on the page. I couldn't focus on the French Revolution when my own family was currently dismantling itself in real time. About an hour later, my phone buzzed against the table. It wasn't a text. It was a phone call from an unknown local number. I stared at it. My dad had just told me to ignore everything, but my mind immediately went to the delivery guy. What if it was the city? What if it was someone trying to serve me papers? My finger hovered over the screen, and before I could talk myself out of it, I swiped to answer. Hello? I said cautiously. Yeah, is this the project manager? A gruff voice asked over the line. I could hear the rumble of a heavy diesel engine in the background and the sharp beep of a truck backing up. My throat tightened. Who is this? It's Gary from Apex Waste Management. I'm sitting outside the address on 4th Street. Your boss lady Clara said you were the guy on site handling logistics. I got the 30-yard roll-off dumpster she ordered, but there's a chained-up sedan blocking the alleyway, and I ain't scratching my rig trying to squeeze past it. Clara's phone is going straight to voicemail. I need to know where you want this thing dropped, or I'm taking it back to the yard and charging you the delivery fee anyway. I closed my eyes and rubbed my forehead. Clara hadn't just put my name on the municipal permits. She was actively handing out my personal cell phone number to blue-collar contractors, using me as her human shield so she didn't have to deal with the messy reality of the empire she had just purchased. Gary, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm not the project manager. I have nothing to do with that building. There was a heavy pause on the line. The diesel engine rumbled. Listen, kid, I got an invoice here with your name on it as a site contact. Clara specifically told dispatch to call you because you're running the day-to-day. If you're not the guy, you better get the guy on the phone, because I got 3 other drops today. Clara lied to you, I said. It felt weird to say it out loud to a stranger, but it was the only truth I had. She fraudulently put my name on those papers. I'm 18 years old. I'm sitting at my aunt's house doing homework. I don't know anything about a dumpster or a chained-up sedan. Gary let out a long, heavy sigh that crackled over the speaker. You gotta be kidding me. She gave me a fake contact? She gave you her brother's contact so she wouldn't have to deal with you. I corrected. I'm sorry you drove out there, but I can't authorize anything, and I definitely can't move a car. Unbelievable, Gary muttered. Amateurs. Always the damn amateurs buying these trash lots thinking they're gonna flip them in a month on a credit card. Fine, I'm hauling it back. But you tell your sister she's blacklisted from Apex until she pays the $75 cancellation fee. I ain't playing games. He hung up before I could say anything else. I set the phone down. My hands were shaking. It was one thing to see my forged signature on a piece of paper. It was another entirely to realize that out there in the real world, heavy machinery was rolling up to a condemned building under my name. If Gary had just dropped that dumpster in the street and blocked traffic, the city would have fined the project manager. Me. 10 minutes later, my dad walked back through the front door. He looked pale. He took off his coat and threw it over the back of a dining chair, then walked into the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water from the tap. He drank the whole thing in one long pull before setting the glass down in the sink. I talked to Tom, he said. He didn't look at me. He kept his eyes fixed on the stainless steel drain. What did he say? My dad gripped the edge of the counter. He said the bank transfer is going to be incredibly difficult to reverse because your mother was a joint account holder. She had the legal right to withdraw the funds. The fact that she funneled it directly into an LLC owned by our daughter is a massive breach of marital trust, and a judge will absolutely factor it into the divorce settlement. But as of right now, today, that money is legally in Clara's possession. It's gone. I swallowed hard. What about the permits? My dad finally turned around. His eyes looked hollow. That's the part that's worse. Tom said we can't just call the city and say take his name off. Submitted those permits with copies of your ID and your social security number. The city views it as a legally binding submission to get you removed and to protect you from the liability of whatever the hell is happening at that building. He stopped. He rubbed his face with both hands, letting out a ragged breath. Dad, what do we have to do? We have to file a police report, he said quietly, for identity theft and forgery. Tom said we have to go on the record with law enforcement and swear out a complaint that Clara committed a felony. And because your mother provided the documents from the safe, she is an accessory. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt very heavy. The grandfather clock kept ticking. If we file a police report, I started, trying to wrap my head around the scale of it. What happens to them? There's a paper trail, my dad said, his voice flat. Clara signed the documents. The delivery guy has a log of dropping the permit off here. If we file the report, the city revokes the permit immediately. The project gets shut down. And Clara, he swallowed. Clara likely gets arrested for fraud. Your mother could face charges too. And if we don't file it, I asked. If we don't file it, you are legally responsible for a rotting, non-compliant commercial property. If a worker gets hurt, if pipe bursts and floods the street, if the roof caves in, you are the primary contractor on record. You get sued. You take the hit. Your credit is ruined before you even graduate T school. I looked down at my phone. I thought about Gary from Apex Waste Management, sitting in his truck, angry and unpaid. I thought about how easily Clara had handed my number over, how casually my mother had unlocked the safe to hand over my social security card. They had built a trap, walked me into it, and expected me to just sit there and take it because we shared the same last name. Dad, I said. He looked at me, bracing himself. He looked like a man waiting for his son to tell him he couldn't do it, that he couldn't pull the trigger on his own mother and sister. A guy from a waste management company just called me, I told him. He was trying to drop off a 30-yard dumpster. Clara gave him my cell phone number and told him I was in charge. She's not just using the permit. She's actively using me to run the site. My dad closed his eyes. The last shred of hesitation seemed to drain out of him. This way, blue card exhausted. Okay, he said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his car keys again. Get your shoes on. We're going to the precinct. I grabbed my sneakers from the mat by the door. My fingers were stiff. It took me 3 tries to tie the laces. My dad didn't rush me. He just stood there, holding his keys, staring at the front door like he was trying to see straight through the wood. He didn't say a word on the drive to the precinct. The late afternoon sun was reflecting off the windshields of the cars in the opposite lane, blinding and bright. The radio was off. The only sound was the hum of the tires and the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal. I stared out the passenger window, watching the familiar streets of my town roll by, feeling like I was entirely detached from my own body. The police station was a flat, roofless brick building downtown. We parked in the visitor lot. The heat radiating off the asphalt was suffocating. You ready? My dad asked. His hand was on the door handle. No, he pushed the door open. We walked inside. The lot smelled like stale coffee and floor wax. There were a few plastic chairs bolted to the floor and thick bulletproof glass separating us from the desk sergeant. My dad walked up to the window. We need to file a report, my dad said. His voice echoed a little in the empty lobby. Identity theft and forgery. Sergeant didn't look up from his monitor right away. Who's the victim? My son, my dad said, gesturing to me. And the perpetrators are my wife and daughter. That made the sergeant look up. His eyes shifted from my dad down to me and back again. He didn't ask any questions. He just pressed a button under his desk, unlocking a heavy metal door to the right of the glass. He told us to go into interview room 3 and wait for a detective. We sat in that room for 40 minutes. There were no windows, just a metal table and 2 chairs. I kept staring at the gray wall, replaying the last few days in my head. A week ago, I was just a high school senior worried about finals and saving up for a decent used car. Now I was sitting in a station, waiting to hand my family over to the state. The door opened. A detective with a tired face and ruffled shirt walked in, carrying a legal pad. He introduced himself as Detective Russo. He sat across from us and clicked his pen. Walk me through it, he said. My dad did most of the talking at first. He explained the bank transfer, the LLC, the sudden purchase of the condemned building. He laid out the timeline perfectly, stripping away all the emotion and just delivering the cold, hard facts. Then he nudged my elbow. I slid the manila folder across the metal table. Detective Russo opened it. He looked at the copied municipal work permit. He looked at my forged signature. This was delivered to you today? Russo asked, looking at me. Yes, sir. By a courier. And you never authorized anyone to use your name or your social security number? No. I'm 18. I'm a student. I don't know anything about construction. Russo made a few notes on his pad. He looked up at my dad. I need to be very clear with both of you about what happens next. If you formally submit this complaint, it enters the system. It goes to the district attorney's office. You can't just take it back tomorrow if you want to change heart or if the family makes nice. This is a felony forgery charge. And because it involves government municipal documents and a commercial property, it crosses into a different tier of fraud. Once I file this, warrants will likely issue. He let that hang in the air. He was giving us hope. He was looking at my dad, waiting to see if a husband and father was actually going to pull the trigger on his own flesh and blood. My dad didn't hesitate. Fine. Russo nodded. He pushed the formal statement form across the table. I need you to write down exactly what you told me, in your own words. Sign and date the bottom. It took me 20 minutes to write it all out. My handwriting was messy, my hands still cramping from the adrenaline. When I handed it back to Russo, he took it, stood up, and told us he'd be in touch. He took the forged permit as evidence. Walking out of the precinct felt different than walking in. The heavy, suffocating dread was gone, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. The bell had been rung. I was celebrating it. We drove back to my aunt's house in the same heavy silence. When we turned onto her street, my dad suddenly hit the brakes. Parked in the driveway, blocking my aunt's minivan, was Mark's silver sedan. Mark was sitting on the front porch steps. He wasn't wearing his tailored suit in the bistro. He was wearing gray sweatpants and a wrinkled t-shirt. He had his head buried in his hands, elbows resting on his knees. My Aunt Sarah was standing on the lawn about 10 feet away from him, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, holding a gardening trowel like a weapon. My dad parked on the street. Stay in the car, he said, unbuckling his seatbelt. No, I said. I opened my door and stepped out onto the asphalt. Mark's head snapped up at the sound of the car doors slamming. He looked absolutely wrecked. The smug, arrogant posture he had carried at the restaurant was completely erased. He looked pale, sweating despite the cool evening air, and there were dark bruised-looking circles under his eyes. He stood up as my dad walked up the driveway. David, please, Mark said. His voice cracked. It didn't sound like him. Please tell me you haven't done anything yet. You need to get off my sister's property, Mark, my dad said. His voice was dangerously low. Before I call the police, David, listen to me. You don't understand, Mark pleaded, taking a step forward. My aunt raised the trowel slightly, but Mark didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on my dad. I didn't know about the permit, I swear to God. Clara handled the municipal paperwork. I didn't know she put his name on it until her phone started blowing up with alerts from the bank about the accounts being frozen. You're a liar, my dad said flatly. I'm not. Mark ran a hand through his hair. He looked frantic. I knew about the 30 grand. I knew about that. But the permit? Using the social? I didn't know she did that. You have to believe me. It doesn't matter what I believe, my dad said, stopping a few feet away from him. We just left the precinct, Mark. The report is filed. It's out of my hands. Mark physically staggered back. He hit the wooden railing of the porch and gripped it to keep his balance. All the blood drained from his face. No, Mark whispered. No, you didn't. I did, my dad said. So you better go home, get a lawyer, and figure out how you're going to explain this to a judge. Mark let out a sound that was half sob, half choke. He sank back down onto the steps, burying his face in his hands again. It's over. We're completely finished. He didn't sound angry. He sounded entirely broken. You should have thought about that before you ambushed an 18-year-old at his birthday dinner to demand free labor on a toxic asset, my dad said coldly. It's not just the 30 grand, Mark said, his voice muffled behind his hands. He looked up, his eyes wild and desperate. David, it's not just the 30 grand. The building was a foreclosure. It was sold at auction as is. We bypassed the standard inspections because Clara said she knew a guy who could do it cheaper off the books, but the guy never showed up. Mark stood up again, pacing the short length of the porch, his words spilling out in a panicked rush. We didn't know about the lines. There are municipal tax liens on the property dating back 5 years, over $60,000. When we closed, those transferred to the LLC, to us. And the structural issues, the foundation on the east wing is totally compromised. The city gave us 30 days to reinforce it, or they condemn the whole lot. That's why Clara was rushing the demolition permit. That's why she needed a project manager on paper today. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. They weren't just trying to save a few bucks on a licensed manager. They were trying to saddle me with the legal liability of a collapsing, debt-ridden sinkhole. If that east wing caved in, my name would be the one on the city's lawsuit. Clara took out a hard money loan to cover the difference on the closing costs. Mark kept going, tears actually welling up in his eyes now. 30% interest. We put our own house up as collateral. If the city revokes the permits and halts construction because of a police investigation, we default. We lose the building, we lose our house, and we still owe the liens. Then you shouldn't have bought it, my dad said. He didn't show a single ounce of pity. She told me her parents were backing us, Mark shouted, suddenly pointing at my dad. Clara told me you and her mother were silent partners. She said the 30 grand was a gift to get us started, and that you were entirely on board with having him manage the site to keep overhead low. I thought this was a family operation. I thought you approved this. My dad froze. The silence in the driveway was deafening. My aunt slowly lowered the gardening trowel. She told you, my dad said, his voice terrifyingly quiet, that I approve this. Yes, Mark breathed out. She said you were too busy with work to be at the closing, but that her mother was handling the transfer of the investment funds. Why do you think I bought him that stupid clipboard? I thought I was welcoming him to the family business. I stared at Mark. The sick, twisted puzzle pieces were finally clicking together. Clara hadn't just manipulated me and my mother. She had lied to her own husband to convince him to risk their entire livelihood. And my mother. My mother had actively helped her sell the lie, handing over our emergency savings and my social security number to keep the fantasy alive. Get in your car, Mark, my dad said. David, please, if you just retract the report. Get in your car, my dad roared. It was the loudest I had ever heard him yell. It echoed down the quiet suburban street. A neighbor across the road stopped watering their lawn to stare. Mark flinched. He looked at my dad, then at me. He looked like he wanted to say something else, to beg one more time, but the absolute disgust on my dad's face stopped him. He practically scrambled down the driveway, got into his sedan, and peeled out, leaving black tire marks on the asphalt. We stood in the driveway for a long time watching the empty street. My Aunt Sarah finally walked over. She didn't say anything at first. She just put her hand on my dad's shoulder. I'm going to make some tea, she said softly. We went inside. The house felt different now. The immediate threat was gone, but the fallout was expanding like a crater. We sat at the kitchen table. My dad pulled out his phone. He had 6 missed calls from my mother, 5 missed calls from Clara, a dozen text messages from various numbers he didn't have saved. He didn't read them. He set the phone face down on the table. She lied to Mark, I said, breaking the silence. She lied to everybody, my dad replied. He rubbed his temples, staring at the wood grain of the table. She built a house of cards, and she used your future as the foundation to keep it propped up. The doorbell rang. All 3 of us jumped. My dad pushed his chair back instantly, his jaw setting into a hard line. He walked down the hallway to the front door. I followed him, standing a few feet back. My dad didn't open the door. He looked through the peephole. It's your mother, he said over his shoulder. Before he could say anything else, the doorknob rang hard. When it didn't turn, a fist started pounding against the wood. David! My mother's voice was muffled through the heavy door, but the frantic, panicked edge to it was unmistakable. David, open the door. The bank called me. They froze everything. They won't let me access the checking account. Open the door. My dad leaned close to the wood. Go home. You have no right to do this, he screamed. That is my money too. Clara is in a panic. The city just emailed her a stop order. They're telling her the permits are under review for fraudulent submission. What did you do? David, what did you do? I stopped you from ruining our son, my dad said. You're ruining your daughter, he shrieked, kicking the bottom of the door. The thud echoed in the hallway. She's going to lose the building. Open this door right now and tell me how to fix this. You can't fix it, my dad said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The police have the forged documents. They have his statement. If you don't get off this porch right now, I am calling 911 and having you removed for trespassing. The pounding stopped abruptly. There was a long, heavy silence from the other side of the door. I could hear her breathing, short and jagged. You're choosing him, my mother said through the door. Her voice was suddenly nervous, devoid of all the panic from a few seconds ago. It was cold and sharp. Over your own marriage. Over your daughter's future. You're choosing a spiteful little boy who couldn't handle a little hard work. My dad stepped back from the door. He didn't answer her. He didn't need to. He stood there in the hallway, listening as her footsteps receded down the wooden stairs of the porch. A moment later, a car engine started, and she drove away. I walked back into the kitchen. My aunt had poured the tea, but nobody was drinking it. I sat down in my chair and pulled my laptop toward me. My history essay was still open on the screen. The cursor was blinking at the end of a half-finished sentence about the French Revolution. It felt so completely meaningless now. My phone, sitting next to the laptop, buzzed. I glanced at it. It was an email notification. Not a text, not a call. An email. It was from my high school guidance counselor, Mr. Harrison. The subject line read, urgent, issue with FAFSA application I found. I opened the email. Hi T, I received an automated alert from the Federal Student Aid Office this afternoon regarding your financial aid application for the upcoming fall semester. There appears to be a flag on your social security number regarding a sudden, massive change in your credit history and associated liabilities. They are requesting immediate verification of several high-yield commercial loans that have suddenly appeared under your name within the last 48 hours. Please come see me in my office first thing tomorrow morning so we can sort this out. If this isn't resolved, your university grants will be suspended. I stared at the screen. My chest tightened so fast I couldn't pull air into my lungs. It wasn't just the municipal permits. Dad, I croaked. He looked up from his mug. I turned the laptop around so he could read the screen. I watched his eyes scan the email. I watched the last remaining color drain from his face. Clara hadn't just used my name to pull a permit. She had used my social security number to co-sign the hard money loans for the building. She had changed my financial identity to a collapsing, debt-ridden property, and the fallout was already hitting the federal system. My college tuition was gone. My dad slowly lowered himself into the wooden chair next to me. He didn't take his eyes off the laptop screen. He reached out with 2 fingers and touched the edge of the monitor, just staring at the email from Mr. Harrison, like it was written in a foreign language. She co-signed, he whispered. I don't even know what a hard money loan is, I said. My voice was completely hollow. I felt like I was floating a few inches above my body. It's a short-term, high-interest loan, my dad said, his voice completely devoid of emotion, usually used by house flippers. Real estate investors who need cash fast to close a deal and plan to pay it back in a few months after renovations. But traditional banks won't touch them because the properties are condemned. So they go to private lenders, sharks basically, people who charge 20-30% interest and demand mass collateral. He finally looked away from the screen and looked at me. Mark said they put their house up as collateral, my dad said. But their house isn't worth enough to cover a multi-unit apartment complex. The lender would have required a cosigner with pristine credit or projected future earnings to offset the massive risk. I don't have pristine credit, I said. I'm 18. I I have a debit card. But you have a clean slate, my dad said, running his hands over his face. And you have a FOSTA profile showing projected enrollment in a 4-year university. She didn't just use your social. She used your entire identity to artificially inflate the borrower profile. My Aunt Sarah walked back into the kitchen. She took one look at our faces and set her tack up down on the counter. What happened now? We need to pull his credit report, my dad said, ignoring her question. He pulled his own laptop out of his briefcase on the floor. Right now, we need to see exactly what she attached his name to. It took 20 minutes. We had to answer security questions that I didn't even know the answers to, because Clara had apparently set up the accounts using variations of my mother's maiden name and old addresses. We finally got through the verification lock on one of the major credit bureaus. The screen loaded. The little blue wheel spun for what felt like an eternity. Then the dashboard appeared. My credit score was a 410. Below that was the total debt, $450,000. My Aunt Sarah let out a sharp gasp and covered her mouth with both hands. I just stared at the number. It was so large it didn't even feel real. It felt like a typo in a video game. But it was sitting right there, attached to my name, under an active commercial line of credit issued by a private equity group I had never heard of. She maxed it out, my dad said, staring at the screen. She took the loan, pulled the maximum draw immediately, and dumped it into that rotting building. Can they do that? I asked, my voice cracking, without ever seeing me. Without me signing anything in person? Post-COVID, a lot of these private lenders do everything through digital DocuSigns. My dad said grimly. As long as she had the social, a copy of your ID, and an email address she controlled. Yes, she forged your electronic signature just like she forged the physical one on the municipal permit. He slammed his laptop shut. The sound made me flinch. Get your coat, my dad said. Where are we going? To the high school. I know Mr. Harrison said tomorrow morning, but we aren't waiting. We need to get ahead of this before the financial aid office officially cancels your grant. We left my aunt standing in the kitchen, still staring at the empty space where the laptop had been. The drive to the high school was a blur. The sun was starting to casting long dark shadows across the suburban lawns. We pulled into the student parking lot. The school was mostly empty. Just a few cars belonging to janitorial staff and teachers working late. We walked through the main doors. The hallway smelled like floor wax and old paper. We found Mr. Harrison in his office, packing his briefcase to leave. He looked up surprised as my dad practically marched through the door. David, Mr. Harrison said, looking from my dad to me. I didn't expect you until tomorrow. I was just heading out. We need 10 minutes, Tom, my dad said. He didn't ask. He just pulled out one of the plastic chairs opposite the desk and sat down. He pointed to the other one for me. Mr. Harrison slowly sat back down in his swivel chair. He looked at me with a mixture of pity and deep concern. I assume you saw my email. We saw it, my dad said. We also pulled his credit report 20 minutes ago. My daughter committed identity theft. She used his social security number to co-sign a $500,000 commercial loan for a fraudulent real estate venture. Mr. Harrison blinked. He sat back in his chair, the professional counselor demeanor cracking for a second. Identity theft? Are you certain? We just filed a police report 2 hours ago for a forged municipal permit, my dad said flatly. The federal loan fraud is new information. I need to know exactly what this means for his university acceptance and his grants. Mr. Harrison pulled his keyboard toward him and woke up his computer. He clicked through a few screens, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. The silence in the small office was suffocating. I could hear the faint hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The Federal Student Aid Office is highly sensitive to sudden massive liabilities, Mr. Harrison explained softly, not looking away from his monitor. Because federal grants are based on financial need, they run automated sweeps to verify the financial status of the applicant. When an 18-year-old suddenly acquires nearly $500,000 in commercial real estate debt overnight, it triggers an immediate fraud alert. From the system's perspective, he is suddenly a high net worth investor hiding assets, or he is laundering money. He's a high school senior who works part-time at a grocery store, my dad snapped. I know that, Mr. Harrison said calmly, but the algorithm doesn't. Right now, his FOFSA profile is locked. The university he committed to has been notified of the discrepancy. If this isn't cleared within 30 days, they will revoke the financial aid package entirely. He will be on the hook for the full out-of-state tuition, or he loses his spot. 30 days. It felt like a death sentence. Can't we just show them the police report? It's not that simple, my dad said heavily. He looked at Mr. Harrison. The local precinct took the report for the forged permit, but this is federal wire fraud. Identity theft crossed state lines with a private lender. Exactly, Mr. Harrison said. He looked at me. You are going to have to file a report with the FTC. You'll need to contact the lender directly, with police documentation, and initiate a fraud investigation. But private lenders are notoriously difficult to work with on these matters. They don't want to lose their money. They will drag their feet, and they will try to hold you liable until a court formally clears you. Harrison printed out a stack of papers and handed them to me. It was a step-by-step guide to recovering from identity theft, the kind of pamphlet you never think you'll actually need to read. I will put a hold on the university's end, Mr. Harrison promised. I'll call the admissions office personally tomorrow and explain the situation. They might give us an extension on the financial aid deadline. But you need to get that debt off his credit report, David, or he's not going anywhere in the fall. We left the school in the dark. The parking lot lights were buzzing. I felt completely numb. Clara hadn't just ruined my birthday. She had systematically dismantled my entire future just to secure a loan on a building that was literally falling apart. When we got back to my aunt's house, a strange car was parked on the street. It was a black SUV with tinted windows. My dad slowed down as we pulled into the driveway. He stared at the S. Stay here, he muttered. But before he could even put the car in park, the front door of my aunt's house opened. My Aunt Sarah walked out onto the porch, hugging her cardigan around herself. And walking out right behind her was a man I had never seen before. He was in his 50s, wearing a sharp, expensive-looking trench coat over a tailored suit. He had a thick folder tucked under his arm. He didn't look angry. He looked entirely calm, which was somehow much more terrifying. My dad got out of the car. I followed him, my legs feeling like lead. Can I help you? My dad asked, stepping between the man and my aunt. The man stopped on the bottom step of the porch. He looked at my dad, then looked directly at me. You must be the project manager, the man said. His voice was smooth, polished. He's an 18-year-old kid, my dad fired back. Who are you and why are you at my sister's house? My name is Vance, the man said, handing my dad a business card. My dad didn't take it. Vance just smiled slightly and tucked it back into his pocket. I represent Vanguard Equity Partners. We hold the paper on the property your daughter purchased yesterday. The hard money lender. They hadn't even waited 24 hours. How did you find this address? My dad demanded. When an investment of this size is involved, we keep very close tabs on our borrowers, Vance said easily. Your daughter and son-in-law have gone entirely radio silent. Their phones are off. They are not at their primary residence. And our field inspector drove by the property this afternoon and found a stop work order taped to the front door by the city. Vance looked at me again. His eyes were cold, assessing. The terms of the loan were very clear, Vance continued. The funds were released specifically for immediate structural remediation. If the city condemns the property due to work stoppage, the loan defaults instantly. We take the building, we take your daughter's house, and we come after the cosigner for the remaining balance. The cosigner is a victim of identity theft, my dad said. His voice was shaking with rage. My daughter forged his signature. We have already filed a police report. Vance didn't even blink. He just nodded slowly, like he had heard this exact excuse 100 times before. A police report for the municipal permits, I assume, Vance said. That's a local matter. But the loan documents, those were digitally signed and notarized by a third-party service. Your daughter provided your son's social security card, his birth certificate, and a secondary form of ID to secure the funds. From our legal department's perspective, this is a fully binding contract. She stole those documents from a safe, I said. My voice sounded weak. Vance looked at me. That is a tragic family dispute. But Vanguard Equity is not a family counselor. We are a financial institution. $450,000 of our capital is currently sitting in an LLC attached to your name. He pulled a document out of his folder and held it out. This time, my dad took it. This is a formal notice of intent to accelerate the loan, Vance said. If the stop work order is not lifted by Monday morning, we will call the note due in full. We will place a lien on your daughter's home, and we will begin wage garnishment and asset seizure procedures against all signatories on the account, including him. He doesn't have any assets, my dad yelled. He's in high school. He has a future earning potential, Vance said smoothly. And we are very patient. Judgments last a long time. Vance turned around and walked back toward his black SUV. He didn't look back. He got in the driver's side, started the engine, and drove away, leaving us standing in the cold driveway. My dad looked down at the piece of paper in his hand. It was printed on heavy, expensive legal paper. They skip-traced us, my Aunt Sarah whispered from the porch. He knocked on the door 10 minutes ago. He knew my name. He knew you were staying here. We went inside. I sat down at the kitchen table and put my head in my hands. The walls felt like they were closing in. I wasn't just losing my college tuition. I was going to be an indentured servant to a private equity firm for the rest of my adult life because my sister wanted to play real estate tycoon. My dad pulled out his phone. He didn't call his divorce lawyer. He scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Detective Russo at the local precinct. Past 8 at night, but he dialed it anyway. It went straight to voicemail. Detective Russo, this is David, my dad said to the machine. He sounded utterly exhausted. We need to escalate the report. It's not just municipal forgery. It's federal wire fraud. We need to press full charges against Clara. Whatever it takes. Call me back. He hung up. Just as he set the phone down, the landline on the kitchen wall rang. It was a harsh, loud ring. We all stared at it. My Aunt Sarah walked over and looked at the caller ID display. It's Clara, she said softly. Don't answer it, my dad ordered. We stood there in silence, listening to the phone ring 4, 5, 6 times. Finally, the answering machine clicked on. There was a short beep and then the sound of static. And then a voice. Dad, Mark said through the speaker. He didn't sound frantic like he had in the driveway. He sounded dead inside. We all froze. Dad, I don't know if you're there. Mark's voice echoed in the kitchen. I tried calling your cell, but I think you lost me. I know you're at Sarah's. Please pick up. You need to come to the hospital. My dad took a step toward the phone. It's Mom, Mark said. His voice hitched, breaking into a dry sob. She took something. She took a lot of something. The paramedics just took her into the ER. Please, David, just come. My dad didn't move. He just stared at the little red light blinking on the machine. It blinked once for every second of silence that stretched out between us and the kitchen. My Aunt Sarah said. Her voice was a dry whisper. He snapped out of it. He reached out and slammed his hand down on the delete button. The red light vanished. He turned around, grabbed his car keys off the counter where he'd just put them down, and walked heavily toward the front door. I'm coming, I said, pushing my chair back. No, he said, not even looking back. You stay here with Sarah. She used my social security number to steal $500,000, Dad. I'm going. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. His shoulders sagged. He didn't have the energy to fight me, and we both knew it. He just nodded once, pulled the door open, and walked out into the cold night air. The drive to the hospital was a different kind of silence than the one coming back from the police station. This one felt thick, like we were breathing underwater. The heat was blasting, but I couldn't stop shivering. I kept staring at the dashboard clock. 8:14 p.m. Just an hour ago, my mother was kicking the front door, screaming that we were choosing a spiteful little boy over the family. Now she was on a journey. I didn't know how to. I tried to find the panic, the deep gut-wrenching terror you're supposed to feel when your mother is in the emergency room. But all I felt was a cold, sick knot of suspicion in my stomach. We pulled into the emergency drop-off lane at St. Jude's. The sliding glass doors opened. The smell of industrial bleach and stale coffee hit me like a physical wall. The waiting room was almost empty. A guy with a bloody towel wrapped around his hand was sitting in the corner, and a tired-looking woman was bouncing a crying baby on her knee. And then there was Clara. She was pacing the length of the linoleum floor near the triage desk. Her makeup was smeared under her eyes, her hair a tangled mess. Mark was sitting in a plastic chair near the wall, staring blankly at his knees. Clara stopped pacing the second she saw us walk through the glass doors. She didn't run to my dad to hug him. She didn't look relieved. Her face twisted into a mask of absolute venomous fury. She marched straight up to us, stopping inches from my dad's chest. Are you happy now? She hissed, her voice vibrating with rage. She pointed a trembling finger at my face. Are you both happy? You did this to her. You pushed her into this. My dad didn't flinch. He didn't yell. He looked at her with a dead flat stare. Where is she, Clara? He asked. They're pumping her stomach. Clara spat out, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. She called me right after she left Aunt Sarah's house. She was sobbing. She said you looked at her like she was a monster. She went home, she drank half a bottle of Chardonnay, and she emptied her prescription of Ambien. She called Mark to say goodbye. I felt the blood drain from my face, Ambien and wine. She left a note on the kitchen counter, Clara continued, her voice rising, echoing in the quiet waiting room. The triage nurse looked up from her computer. It said she couldn't live in a family that was trying to put her daughter in prison. She said the guilt of what you're doing to us was killing her. You did this, Dad. You filed that police report, and you pushed a gun to her head. Stop talking, my dad said. I won't Stop, Clara yelled. She's dying because of your stubborn pride. Because he couldn't just suck it up and help us out for a few months. Mark finally stood up. He walked over, looking like a ghost in his gray sweatpants, and put a hand on Clara's arm. Clara, stop, please. Not here. Don't tell me to stop. He yanked her arm away. She looked right at me. If she dies, it is on you. If you don't call the police right now and retract that statement, you are a murderer. Ma'am, a security guard stepped out from behind the triage desk, resting a hand on his radio. You need to lower your voice, or I'm going to have to ask you to wait outside. Clara glared at the guard, but she shut her mouth, crossing her arms tightly over her chest and breathing in ragged, ugly gasps. My dad walked past her and went to the desk. He gave the nurse my mother's name and proved he was her husband. The nurse told him she was in Bay 4, currently being stabilized, and the doctor would be out to speak with him shortly. We sat down in the plastic chairs on the opposite side of the room from Clara and Mark. We sat there for 45 minutes. Every time the double doors to the ER swung open, my dad's head would snap up. The anger that had carried him through the afternoon was completely gone, replaced by a hollow, sickening anxiety. He kept rubbing his hands together, staring at the floor. I sat next to him, staring at a poster about his symptoms on the wall. She timed it, I whispered. I didn't mean to say it out loud, but the words just slipped out. My dad looked at me. What? She went home and called Mark, I said, keeping my voice low so Clara couldn't hear across the room. Why didn't she call 911? If she really wanted to die, why did she take sleeping pills and call the one person she knew would immediately call an ambulance? She timed it so they would find her. She wants us to feel so guilty that we drop the charges. My dad stared at me. For a second, I thought he was going to reprimand me for being so heartless. I thought he was going to tell me not to speak about my mother that way while she was in a hospital bed. Instead, he closed his eyes and let his head rest against the cinder block wall behind him. I know, he said softly. The double doors swung open again. A doctor in blue scrubs with the board walked out, scanning the waiting room. Family for Elaine? My dad stood up immediately. Clara sprinted across the room, beating us to the doctor. I'm her daughter, Clara said breathlessly. Is she okay? Is she awake? The doctor looked between my dad and Clara. Are you the husband? Yes, my dad said. She's stable, the doctor said, looking back at his notes. We pumped her stomach and administered activated charcoal. The toxicology screen showed a moderate amount of zolpidem. Frankly, it wasn't a lethal dose. She took maybe 5 or 6 pills. She would have had a very deep sleep and a terrible headache tomorrow, but it wouldn't have stopped her heart. Still, given the circumstances and the note her son-in-law mentioned, protocol dictates we place her on a mandatory 72-hour psychiatric hold for observation. A massive breath shuddered out of my dad's chest. The tension holding him upright seemed to snap. Clara, however, didn't look relieved. She looked calculating. Can we see her? She asked the doctor. She's unconscious right now, the doctor replied. The sedatives and the remaining Ambien in her system will keep her out until tomorrow morning. We'll be transferring her to the psychiatric ward on the 3rd floor within the hour. You can visit her during regular hours tomorrow. The doctor nodded at us and walked back through the double doors. We stood there in the middle of the waiting room. The immediate crisis was over. My mother was alive, but the nightmare hadn't changed. The $500,000 loan was still in my name. The city permits were still forged. Clara turned to my dad. The tearful, panicked daughter routine vanished instantly, replaced by the cold, desperate businesswoman. Dad, she said, her voice dropping to a low, urgent whisper. You heard the doctor. She's going to be in here for 3 days. She's not in her right mind. You have to fix this. I am fixing it, my dad said tiredly. I'm leaving. Listen to me. Clara stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the exit. Vanguard called me an hour ago. The guy Van. He said he went to Aunt Sarah's house. He said you told him about the police report. I did, my dad said. You have to call him back, Clara demanded, her eyes wide and manic. You have to tell him it was a misunderstanding. You have to tell him I had verbal authorization to sign for the LLC. Dad, if they accelerate the loan, Mark and I lose our house. We lose everything. You have to call the precinct and retract the report before Vanguard pulls the funding. I stared at her. My mother was currently lying unconscious with a tube down her throat, and Clara was using it as leverage to save her real estate scam. She tried to kill herself because you tore this family apart, Clara hissed, taking another step closer. The least you can do is fix the loan so she doesn't wake up to a bankrupt daughter. My dad looked at Clara like he had never seen her before in his life. You forged his name, my dad said, his voice flat. You stole his social security number. You stole $30,000 from your mother and me. I borrowed it, Clara shot back. It was an investment. I was gonna pay it back with interest once the building flipped. It's not my fault the city found the tax liens. I just need a month to clear the stop work order. If you just tell Vanguard. I am not telling Vanguard anything, my dad interrupted, his voice finally rising, echoing sharply off the linoleum. You committed federal wire fraud. Your mother helped you. And instead of owning up to it, your mother swallowed a handful of sleeping pills to manipulate me into letting you get away with it. Clara's jaw dropped. How can you say that? She's your wife, and you are my daughter, he said bitterly. And right now, I don't want to look at either of you. He turned and walked toward the sliding glass doors. I followed right behind him. If you walk out that door, you're dead to me, Clara screamed across the waiting room. My dad didn't stop. He didn't even break his stride as the automatic doors slid open, letting the freezing night air hit us in the face. We got back into the car. My dad put the key in the ignition, but he didn't turn it. He just sat there, staring out the windshield at the orange glow of the hospital parking lot lights. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. He looked down at it. I looked too. It was an email notification. Subject: urgent, issue with FAFSA application. My dad picked up the phone. He opened the email and read it in silence. I couldn't see his face in the dark cab of the car, but I saw the way his thumb hovered over the screen, trembling slightly. What does it say? I asked. He didn't answer right away. He swallowed hard, then read it out loud. David, I managed to get hold of the admissions office at the university. I explained the situation regarding the identity theft and the police report. Unfortunately, because the loan is federal in nature, it triggered an automatic lag in the National Student Loan Data System. Until the debt is formally discharged by a judge or the lender, the university's compliance office has frozen his enrollment status. They are giving us until the end of the business week to provide a formal letter of discharge from Vanguard Equity, or they will be forced to rescind his acceptance to the freshman class due to liability concerns. My dad lowered the phone. End of the business week. It was Tuesday night. They're taking back my acceptance, I asked. The words didn't even make sense in my mouth. I had worked for 4 years for that acceptance letter. I had maintained a 3.9 GPA. I had played 3 sports. I had done everything right. No, my dad said, his voice hardening into something cold and terrifying. He turned the key, and the engine roared to life. No, they're not. He threw the car into reverse and backed out of the parking space so fast the tires squealed against the pavement. Where are we going? I asked, gripping the handle on the door. Dad, where are we going? We are going to find Clara's contractor, he said, staring at the road ahead. The one she said was supposed to do the inspections off the books. If she was cutting corners with Vanguard's money, there's a paper trail. And Vanguard's contract explicitly states the loan is voided by undisclosed structural fraud prior to purchase. He gripped the steering wheel so tight, his knuckles were white in the glow of the dashboard. She wants to play real estate tycoon, he muttered, merging onto the empty highway. Fine, let's look at her books. He didn't drive to the condemned apartment building. He drove straight to Clara and Mark's house in the suburbs. It was a 20-minute drive across town, and neither of us spoke a single word. My dad just gripped the steering wheel, his jaw locked, his eyes fixed on the road. We pulled into their driveway. The house was completely dark. Mark's sedan was still at the hospital. My dad cut the engine and stepped out. I followed him up the front walkway. He reached into his coat pocket, pulled out his heavy ring of keys, and flipped through them until he found the brass bear key Clara had given my parents 3 years ago when she and Mark first bought the place. He unlocked the front door and pushed it open. The house smelled like vanilla plug-in air fresheners and stale coffee. Everything was perfectly arranged in the living room. Throw pillows perfectly karate chopped on the sofa. A massive fake fiddle leaf fig tree in the corner. It looked exactly like the kind of house a successful young real estate investor was supposed to have. It was all staging. Office, my dad said, flipping on the hallway light. Back bedroom. We walked down the hall. The door was cracked open. My dad pushed it wide, and we both stopped in the doorway. If the living room was staging, the office was the reality of Clara's mind. It was a disaster. The desk was buried under stacks of mail, unopened envelopes, and legal pads covered in frantic handwriting. There was a massive corkboard leaning against the wall, covered in printouts of Zillow listings, motivational quotes about hustle culture, and a hand-drawn chart with arrows pointing to different LLC names. My dad walked straight to the desk. He didn't bother being gentle. He started sweeping stacks of mail aside, looking for filing boxes. Start checking those legal pads, he told me, pulling open the heavy bottom drawer of the desk. Look for names, phone numbers, anything with contractor or inspection written next to it. I picked up a legal pad. The top page was just a list of banks and interest rates, most of them violently crossed out with a red marker. I flipped to the next page. It was a list of names. Plumbers, electricians, drywall guys. Half of them had too expensive or wants cash up front written next to them. My dad pulled a thick accordion-style plastic folder out of the bottom drawer. It was heavily taped together. He set it on the clear space on the desk and unhooked the elastic band. Look at this, he muttered. I leaned over his shoulder. The folder was filled with printed emails. My dad started sifting through them. They were all correspondence between Clara and the listing agent for the condemned apartment building. He pulled out an email dated 3 weeks ago. He read it silently, his face turning an ashen gray. He handed it to me. It was from an independent structural engineer. Clara had hired him to do a preliminary walkthrough before the auction. Clara T. The email read. As discussed on the phone, I am attaching my preliminary findings. I cannot officially sign off on this property. The foundation settling on the east wing exceeds all municipal safety tolerances. The load-bearing walls in units 104 through 108 are bowing. If you proceed with this purchase, you are looking at a minimum of $250,000 in immediate structural remediation before the city will even allow you to pull cosmetic permits. Do not buy this building without a massive cash reserve. She knew, I whispered. She knew, my dad echoed, his voice vibrating with a cold, terrifying anger. She knew exactly how toxic this building was, and she bought it anyway. He dug deeper into the folder. He pulled out the loan application she had submitted to Vanguard Equity. It was 50 pages long. He flipped past the property details, past Mark's financial disclosures, straight to the cosigner section. There it was, my name, my social security number. But that wasn't what made my dad freeze. Attached to the back of the loan application, submitted as proof of the cosigner's guaranteed future income, were printed screenshots of my federal student aid portal. My stomach violently turned over. I felt physically sick. She hadn't just used my social security number. She had logged into my FOFSA account. She had printed out the pages showing my awarded Pell Grants, my federal subsidized loans, and my university merit scholarships. She had presented my college financial aid to Vanguard Equity, as if it were liquid capital I was bringing to the table to back a real estate loan. She had your passwords, my dad said, staring at the screenshots. How did she have your passwords? Mom, I said, my voice barely audible. Mom helped me set up the portal last month because I needed her tax returns for the application. She wrote the password down on a sticky note and put it in the lockbox in her bedroom. My dad let the papers drop onto the desk. He leaned heavily against the edge of the wood, putting his face in his hands. He took a long, ragged breath that sounded like he was tearing something loose in his chest. Your mother didn't just hand over her savings, he said into his hands. She handed over every single key to your life, Dad. What does Vanguard do when they find out the collateral is federal grant money? He dropped his hands. He looked older than I had ever seen him. The lines around his mouth were deeply etched, shadowed by the harsh overhead light of the office. It means Clara didn't just defraud Vanguard, he said quietly. She committed fraud against the Department of Education. And she used your IP address or your mom's IP address to do it. He didn't wait for me to process that. He grabbed the entire accordion folder, the legal pads, and the printed emails, and shoved them all into a canvas tote bag he found hanging on the back of the door. We're done here, he said. We have what we need. We walked out of the house, locking the door behind us. The drive back to Aunt Sarah's house was entirely silent, but it wasn't the numb, floating silence from before. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums. When we walked into my aunt's kitchen, it was past midnight. The house was dark except for the small light over the stove. Aunt Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, a half-empty mug of tea in front of her. She looked up when we walked in. She saw the canvas tote bag in my dad's hand. My dad started, his voice rough. She's stable, Aunt Sarah said softly. The hospital called about 20 minutes ago. They moved her to the psychiatric ward. She's going to sleep through the night. The nurse said she'll be medically cleared for visitors by noon tomorrow. My dad set the tote bag on the table. He He didn't ask how my mother was feeling. He didn't ask if Mark was still there. He just pulled out a chair and sat down, staring blankly at the floral pattern on the vinyl table. Get some sleep, kid, he told me, not looking up. Tomorrow is going to be the longest day of our lives. I didn't argue. I walked down the hallway to the guest room. I didn't bother changing out of my clothes. I just kicked off my sneakers, crawled under the heavy quilt, and stared at the ceiling. I thought about the clipboard. The stupid, cheap wooden clipboard with head property manager etched into it. Just a few days ago, that was the biggest problem in my life. A tacky, insulting birthday gift from a narcissistic sister. Now, I was staring down the barrel of federal fraud investigations, a $500,000 debt, and a mother in a psychiatric ward. I didn't think I would sleep, but exhaustion eventually dragged me under. I woke up to the sound of my dad's voice. It wasn't a yell. It was a low, steady, business-like tone. I sat up. The sunlight was streaming through the blinds. I checked my phone. It was 8:30 a.m. No text from Clara. No text from Mark. I walked out into the hallway and leaned against the wall near the kitchen. My dad was sitting at the table, a cup of black coffee in front of him, the contents of Clara's tote bag spread out across the wood. He had his phone pressed to his ear. Yes, Detective Russo, I understand you're busy, my dad was saying, but the scope of the report we filed yesterday has changed significantly. I have physical documentation that my daughter committed federal wire fraud and defrauded the Department of Education using my son's FAFSA credentials. I also have proof she deliberately withheld structural condemnation reports to secure a commercial loan under his name. A long pause. The detective was saying something on the other end. No, my dad said firmly. I am not waiting for the district attorney to review the municipal forgery first. The private lender has already sent a skip tracer to our temporary residence. They are threatening to accelerate a $450,000 loan by Monday. I need you to amend the report today so I can take it to the FBI field office in the city. If local PD can't handle federal student aid fraud, point me to the agent who can. Another pause. My dad picked up a pen and started writing a number down on the back of an envelope. He said, I'll expect your call. He hung up. He let out a long exhale, staring at the number he just wrote down. I walked into the kitchen. He looked up at me. Russo is passing it up the chain, he told me. Because it involves FOPs and federal funds, it's out of local jurisdiction. He gave me the number for a contact at the Regional Inspector General's office for the Department of Education. We have a meeting with them at 1 o'clock. He picked up his coffee mug. His hand was remarkably steady. What about Mom? I asked. The question hung in the air. My dad looked away, his eyes focusing on the window above the sink. Aunt Sarah is going to the hospital at noon, he said. She's going to bring your mother a change of clothes and her toiletries. Are we going? No. My dad set the mug down. We have to meet with the Inspector General. And honestly, I don't think I can look at her right now without screaming. At 11:45 a.m., Aunt Sarah packed a small duffel bag with some clothes she had grabbed from our house earlier that morning. She looked nervous. She hugged me before she walked out the door, telling me to breathe and just focus on getting my name cleared. My dad and I left 10 minutes later. We drove downtown, past the bistro where we had celebrated my birthday, past the municipal court building, to a massive sterile glass and steel high-rise that housed the regional federal offices. We went through metal detectors. We signed in at the security desk. We took the elevator to the 14th floor. We met with an investigator named Agent Harris. He was a bald, sharply dressed man with a quiet, intense demeanor. We sat in a small conference room with a view of the city skyline, and my dad laid everything out on the table. The forged municipal permits, the emails from the structural engineer, the Vanguard loan documents, and finally the printed FOSTA screenshots. Agent Harris didn't say much at first. He just read. He read every single page. He compared the signatures. He looked at the timestamps on the FOSTA printout. When he finally looked up, his expression was completely unreal. Your daughter, Agent Harris said slowly, tapping his pen against the Vanguard loan application, treated a federal Pell Grant as lit collateral for a high-risk commercial real estate venture. Yes, my dad said. And she accessed a protected federal portal using stolen credentials to generate the proof of income. Yes, Agent Harris leaned back in his chair. I've been investigating student aid fraud for 12 years. Usually parents hiding income or students lying about their dependency status. This is remarkably brazen. You had no knowledge of this. None, I said. I found out yesterday when my high school guidance counselor emailed me that my financial aid was frozen due to a massive debt discrepancy. Harris nodded. He pulled a thick folder from his briefcase and began organizing the papers we had given him. Here's what happens now, Harris said, his voice dropping into an official clinical register. I'm opening a formal federal investigation into Clara and Mark. I will be contacting Vanguard Equity this afternoon to inform them that their collateral documents are part of an active federal fraud case that will legally bar them from attempting to collect the debt from you or seizing any assets under your name until the investigation is concluded. A massive weight, one I didn't even realize how heavily I was carrying, suddenly lifted off my chest. I actually let out a shaky breath. However, Harris continued, holding up a finger. Because your mother actively provided the FOFSA passwords and the social security card, she will also be named in the investigation. We will have to subpoena her bank records, her phone records, and her internet service provider to prove she facilitated the unauthorized access. My dad didn't flinch. Do what you have to do. It will take time, Harris warned. Months, possibly. I will issue a preliminary letter of finding that you can provide to your university's financial aid office. It should be enough to unfreeze your FOFSA status and secure your enrollment for the fall. But your credit will be locked down tight until a federal judge officially expunges the Vanguard loan. We spent another 2 hours in that office, signing affidavits, giving sworn statements, and officially handing over the original copies of the documents we found in Clara's office. By the time we walked back out onto the street, the sun was starting to dip behind the skyscrapers. The air was colder. I felt completely drained, empty. But for the first time in 3 days, I didn't feel like I was actively drowning. We got in the car. My dad put his hands on the steering wheel, but didn't start the engine. He pulled out his phone. He had 2 missed calls from Aunt Sarah. He called her back. Put it on speaker. Sarah, my dad said. We just finished with the Inspector General. It went well. They're issuing the letters, David. Aunt Sarah's voice came through the speaker. She sounded out of breath. She sounded rattled. What's wrong? Are you at the hospital? I'm in the hallway outside the psych ward, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. David, you need to get down here. I told you I'm not seeing her today. It's not just her, Sarah said urgently. Clara is here, and she brought a lawyer. My dad frowned, his brow furrowing. A lawyer? To a psychiatric ward? Yes, a guy in a suit. I was sitting with Elaine in her room. She was crying, saying she just wanted to go home. Then Clara walked in with this guy. She told me to leave the room. I refused, but Elaine told me to wait outside. What are they doing, Sarah? My dad asked, his voice tightening. David, Clara is trying to get Elaine to sign over power of attorney. The silence in the car was absolute. I stared at the radio display. What? My dad breathed out. I heard them talking before the door closed, Sarah said, panic bleeding into her voice. Clara is telling her that because you filed the police report, the state is going to freeze all the marital assets. She's telling Elaine that the only way to protect her half of the money and to save Clara's house from Vanguard is to sign a durable power of attorney today so Clara can transfer the rest of your joint savings into an offshore LLC before the police lock the accounts. My dad's face went completely blank. It was the face of a man watching the last remaining pillar of his life collapse. My mother had just survived a suicide attempt. She was sitting in a locked psychiatric ward on a mandatory 72-hour hold, and Clara's immediate priority, less than 24 hours after her mother almost died, wasn't to comfort her. It was to use her vulnerable state to legally siphon the rest of my dad's retirement money to save her rotting apartment building. And my mother had asked Aunt Sarah to leave the room so she could listen to the pitch. My dad ended the call. He didn't say goodbye. He started the car. He didn't drive back to the suburbs. He pulled out into traffic and headed straight for St. Jude's Hospital. The drive didn't take 20 minutes this time. He drove like a man who had absolutely nothing left to lose. He didn't speed. He didn't run red lights, but his grip on the wheel was white-knuckled, and he didn't say a single word until he put the car in park in the hospital garage. We walked through the lobby, bypassing the triage desk entirely, and got into the elevator. He hit the button for the third floor. The psychiatric ward was behind a set of heavy double doors with reinforced glass. My dad pressed the intercom button. A nurse asked for his name and relation to the patient. A second later, a loud electronic buzz sounded, and my dad shoved the door open. Aunt Sarah was sitting on a plastic chair in the hallway, wringing her hands. The moment she saw us, she stood up and pointed to a closed door 3 rooms down. They're still in there, she whispered. My dad didn't hesitate. He walked up to the door, turned the handle, and pushed it wide open. I stepped in right behind him. The room was small and stark white. My mother was sitting up in the hospital bed, wearing a faded blue gown, looking pale and completely exhausted. The IV line was still taped to the back of her hand. But what made my stomach turn was the heavy black binder resting on her lap. Clara was standing right beside the bed, holding a pen out to her. Standing on the other side of the room was a man in a sharp charcoal suit, holding a leather briefcase. They all froze to the door like a wall. David, my mother gasped, her hands flying to her chest. Put the pen down, Elaine, my dad said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Clara immediately moved to block the bed. You need to leave. You have no right to be in here. We are conducting private legal business. My dad ignored her completely. He looked directly at the man in the suit. Are you the attorney? My dad asked. The man straightened his tie, looking slightly uncomfortable, but trying to maintain his professional composure. I am. I was retained by your daughter to draft a durable power of attorney for your wife. Given the acute distress she is currently under, she wishes to secure her financial interests. Is that right? My dad said calmly. He took a step further into the room. Did my daughter also inform you that the financial interests you are attempting to secure are currently the subject of an active federal wire fraud investigation? The lawyer stopped. He looked at my dad, then looked sharply at Clara. What? Dad, shut up! Clara screamed, her voice cracking. She shoved the pen at my mother. Mom, just sign it. Sign it right now. Don't sign a damn thing, my dad said. He kept his eyes locked on the lawyer. My name is David. That is my wife. The marital assets you are trying to transfer into my daughter's LLC are currently frozen by the Department of Education's Inspector General. We just spent 2 hours with Agent Harris at the regional field office. She used my son's plastic credentials and his social security number to fraudulently secure a commercial loan from Vanguard Equity. If you facilitate the transfer of those funds today, you are legally participating in the concealment of assets tied to federal fraud. The lawyer didn't say a word. He didn't ask for proof. He just looked at Clara's panicked, sweating face, and he knew instantly that my dad was telling the truth. He reached over, grabbed the black binder right off my mother's lap, and snapped it shut. Hey, Clara yelled, grabbing his arm. What are you doing? We paid your retainer. My retainer does not cover federal racketeering or wire fraud, Clara, the lawyer said, his voice dropping into a cold, furious whisper. He shoved the binder into his briefcase and clicked the lock shut. Do not ever contact my office again. He pushed past Clara, walked past my dad and me without making eye contact, and practically ran down the hospital hallway. The room fell dead quiet. The only sound was the steady, rhythmic beating of my mother's heart monitor. Clara stood by the bed, her hands hovering in the air, staring at the empty space where the lawyer had just been. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. The house of cards had finally permanently collapsed. My mother looked down at her empty lap, then slowly looked up at my dad. Tears started welling in her eyes. The same manipulative, victimized tears she had used for the last 20 years to get her way. Dave, please, my mother whimpered, her voice trembling. I was just so scared. I didn't know what to do. You locked me out of the account, and Clara said we were going to lose everything. You were going to lose everything, my dad said. There was no anger left in his voice. There was just an absolute bone-deep exhaustion. I am filing for divorce tomorrow morning. My lawyer will be contacting you here. You can figure out where you're going to live once they discharge you, because you are not coming back to my house. My mother let out a loud, agonizing sob, burying her face in her hands. You can't do this. I'm your wife. I made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake, Elaine. You made a choice. My dad looked at her one last time, his expression completely blank. You chose her ego over your life, and now you get to live with the consequences. He turned around and walked out of the room. I stood there for a second longer. Clara slowly turned her head to Eddie. The absolute panic in her eyes was finally real. There was no more smugness, no more corporate buzzwords, no more acting like the matriarch of a real estate empire. She was just a terrified fraud who had finally run out of runway. Keep the clipboard, Clara, I told her quietly. I turned my back on her, walked out into the hallway, and let the heavy door swing shut behind me, cutting off the sound of my mother's crying. Late August arrived with a brutal heat wave, baking the asphalt of the University parking lot. I slammed the trunk of my dad's car shut, wiping a bead of sweat off my forehead. The trunk was packed full of plastic bins, a mini fridge, and duffel bags. My dad handed me an iced coffee from the cup holder. Got everything? Yeah, I said, taking a sip. Just waiting for room inspection, and then I get the keys. It had been 3 months since the hospital. 3 months of absolute hell, but but a different kind of hell. It was the sterile, bureaucratic hell of lawyers, federal agents, and endless paperwork. Agent Harris had been true to his word. The preliminary letter of finding from the Inspector General had been enough for the university's financial aid office. They unflagged my FAFSA, reinstated my Pell Grants, and cleared my enrollment just 3 days before the deadline. Vanguard Equity was furious, but they couldn't touch me. Once the federal investigation formally named Clara and Mark as the primary suspects in wire fraud, Vanguard had no choice but to drop collection efforts against my name and pivot entirely to liquidating Clara's assets. They took the condemned apartment building. They took Clara and Mark's house. Mark filed for divorce in July, claiming he was entirely ignorant of the federal crimes. He moved back to another state to live with his parents, leaving Clara to face the indictment alone. Clara is currently living in a cramped one-bedroom rental on the edge of town, working at a call center to pay her criminal defense attorney, waiting for her trial date. I haven't spoken to her since the hospital. I never will again. My dad sold our family home. The divorce was finalized quickly because my mother had zero leverage and a pending federal accessory charge hanging over her head. My dad took his half of the equity and bought a quiet 2-bedroom condo near a lake a few towns over. It has a guest room for me during the holidays. He looks 5 years younger. My mother is renting a room in a house she shares with 3 other women. She tries to call me on holidays. I have her number permanently blocked. You ready for this? My dad asked, leaning against the side of the car, looking up at the massive brick dormitory in front of us. Yeah, I said, feeling a genuine smile crack across my face for the first time in what felt like forever. I'm ready. He reached out and pulled me into a hug. It was tight and grounding. I'm proud of you, kid, I said, stepping back and clapping me on the shoulder. Go get settled. Call me on Sunday. I watched him get into his car, start the engine, and drive away, blending into the stream of other parents leaving their kids to start their own lives. I grabbed my heaviest duffel bag, swung it over my shoulder, and walked toward the doors. I didn't look back.